Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy, our eighth session on Sir Thomas Malory's La Morte d'Arthur. And tonight, we're going to see what we can do about finishing the Book of Arthur, the very first book of the very first section of the work. So, lots of adventures. The big theme tonight runs throughout everything, whether we get to cover it all or not, is, think twice before you mess with the Lady of the Lake. I suppose, really, if you put it all together, the take-home message is you got to get in that preemptive beheading right off, or else it's all downhill against the Ladies of the Lake. So you got to be on the alert there. But anyway, let's jump. Well, okay, two quick announcements or sort of reminders, things that I've announced before. But first, we've got tomorrow. Today's Wednesday. Yes, tomorrow. Tomorrow's our next Mythgard Movie Club session, and it's going to be on the film Predestination, which is, of course, based on a Robert Heinlein story. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So that's tomorrow afternoon, and then. Or tomorrow evening, sorry. And then we have, of course, our next moot coming up, which is growing closer now. We're only 1 month away from Middle Moot in Kansas City. We've had some good signups for that. I hope that you'll be able to join us out in Kansas City this year. If you live anywhere in the central part of the country, hope you'll be able to make it down. Gonna be a great time there. So please make sure you don't forget to register for Middle Moot if you are anywhere in the greater Kansas City area. All right, well, let's get straight into the action here. Lots of slides to cover tonight. So let's see how we do. We were in the middle of finishing, we're about 2/3 of the way through by numbers of quests, through the rather unusual events, the sort of marvel of the day at King Arthur and Queen Guinevere's wedding, which was, of course, that confusing business about the White Hart and the Brachet and the Knight and the kidnapped Brachet and the kidnapped Knight and Sir Gawain, Sir Tor, and King Pellinore being sent off after them. We looked at Sir Gawain's quest when he covered himself in shame by decapitating the lady as a direct consequence of his refusing mercy to a knight who was asking for mercy, both of which are pretty much equal black marks on his name as a knight. And then we were looking at briefly at Sir Tor's quest, which is much less eventful. Sir Tor, of the three of them, is the one who sort of in the most kind of straightforward way just sort of achieves his quest, finishes with honor and brings home the Brachet, right? King Pellinore has almost as easy a time, but for this one incident that happens near the beginning of his quest. Fond King Pellinore armed him and mounted upon his horse and rode more than a pass after the laddie that the knight lad away. So remember, there's the lady who says, "Hey, you took my Brachet," and then she gets captured, right? And as he rode in a forest, he saw in a valley a damosel sit by a well, and a wounded knight in her armes, and King Pellinore saluted her. That means he said hi. Saluted, essentially. And when she was ware of him, she cried on loud, and sighed, "Help me, knight, for Jesus' sake." But King Pellinore would not tarry. He was so eager in his quest, and ever she cried 100 times after help. When she saw he would not abide, she prayed unto God to send him as much need of help as she had, and that he might feel it, or he died. So as the book telleth, the knight there died that was wounded, and wherefore for pure sorrow the laddie slew herself with his sword. Okay, so King Pellinore here is obviously not as bad as doing what he did before. Not doing what he did, doing what Gawain did, right? When you overcome a knight in fair combat and he begs for mercy, you grant it. I mean, like, there has to be some extreme extenuating circumstances. And even if there are extenuating circumstances, you generally don't just decapitate somebody who's kneeling there begging you for mercy, which is what Gawain was fixing to do. With King Pellinore, it's not the same situation, right? This is not quite as unknightly, right, of King Pellinore as it was of Sir Gawain. He is so eager in his quest that he doesn't grant help that he could grant. This is still bad. I mean, this is, King Pellinore is going to regret this. Tarloniel says, "Good grief, these knights are such jerks." I know, right? I mean, it's hard. King Pellinore's having a rough couple weeks here. I know. He's just not endearing himself to the public here, I think. But it's hard because on the one hand, this staying really focused on your quest and pursuing it no matter what, that is a knightly virtue here, right? But one of the things that Malory is setting up is a sort of a classic conflict of duties, right? That is, he does have the duty to stick to his quest. He said that he would pursue this, and keep in mind, this is not just, in a sense, the quests of Sir Gawain and Sir Tor were slightly more frivolous. I mean, frivolous is a hard word to use. I mean, there were quests that were given to them that they took in honor, at the high feast of the wedding of King Arthur. So it's not like there was nothing riding on it. There was, but you're chasing a hart, you're pursuing a stolen dog. It's just not a huge deal. Whereas King Pellinore, like, a woman was abducted, right? So what we have, we do need to imagine King Pellinore sort of torn between two ladies who are both needing his assistance, right? There's this damsel who is, lamenting over this wounded knight, which he has nothing to do with, and there's this lady who's being dragged off by a knight against her will, which is his job to go and fix. So, it is possible to do, a sort of defense. I mean, if I were briefed for King Pellinore's defense, right? If I were his defense barrister, I would make my case something like this. I would say, look, King Pellinore, there are two ladies, both of whom are crying out for his assistance. Yes, this lady is crying out right before him, right? But the fact that he can't hear the other lady crying out for his help is just because she's further away, right? But in no less need of his help. Indeed, more arguably because her state is something he could do something about, right? She's been captured by a hostile knight, whom King Pellinore could beat the stuffing out of and save her, whereas it's unclear whether he can do anything for this wounded knight here. So if he turns away from his quest and tries to help this lady, he might not be able to help her wounded friend, the knight here, and then he would almost certainly lose the knight who's riding off with the kidnapped lady. So, this is... I do think that this is... simply imagining King Pellinore going along and being like, I am on a self-important quest, right? And this lady saying, please, please, please help me, and him being like, talk to the hand, right? It could be made to sound pretty bad. I don't think it's actually as bad as that. I think this is intended to be a more difficult conundrum for poor King Pellinore than it might perhaps seem at first. But of course, it ends with another lady committing suicide with the sword of a dead knight, which of course does happen all the time. I don't know, Arthur, whether the damsels are wearing red shirts, but it seems like they might as well do at this point, essentially. Yeah, it's tough. Sarah's wondering, is the lady's prayer actually a curse? Yeah, basically it is. She prayed unto God to send him as much need of help as she had, and that he might feel it or he died. That means before, ere he died, essentially, prior to his death. Before you die, I hope that you are sometime in as much need of help as we are. and basically she is praying that King Pellinor be put in the same position that she is in, so that he can come to appreciate the despair that he is leaving her in. David Atlee is wondering is asking God for this kind of help sinful? Well, yes. I'm going to go ahead and go with yes on that one. I cannot imagine that the church would condone this sort of thing. I think the church would condemn this sort of thing on several fronts, actually. Like trying to use God as an instrument of vengeance is like double or triple sketchy. I mean, this is a natural kind of expression of grief on her part, but yeah, this is not a generally sanctioned sort of prayer to pray. Definitely. Veronica says, not to mention slaying yourself. Yeah, also a big deal, which does kind of suggest, Veronica, that perhaps this woman, when she's praying this prayer, is perhaps not in the optimal sort of spiritual place, essentially, to put it lightly, right? So yeah, this is a bit, suicide's a big deal. You wouldn't know it from the way people are carrying on. Right. Suicide, and in particular, suicide for love. There was no implication, remember, back with Uther Pendragon at the very beginning, who was suffering from pure sorrow and anger at his love being thwarted, right? His desire, at least, being thwarted at the beginning. Now, he wasn't threatening to kill himself at any point. It hadn't sort of progressed to that point. But people who are either feeling that their love condition is going to be terminal itself, or that they're going to kill themselves either actively, like this damsel does with the sword, or passively, like Sir Pelleas is later going to be doing, which I hope to get to tonight. That is by planning to go to bed and stop eating until he dies. That's also still suicide, just slightly more protracted. Nancy, you're right. I mentioned Uther because he did suspect that his case might be terminal, right? I mean, like, death was on the table, right? He was concerned about this, that again, he wasn't on the cusp of death, and he certainly wasn't threatening suicide. But I mean, love is a high stakes game. That's something we certainly see, right? If there's one thing we can learn from the corpses of damsels strewn around the countryside in these early quests, it's that loving and being beloved is a very high stakes situation. And David, this is a common element. Yes, it's a common element in medieval romance, definitely. We see people both dying because they are languishing for love. This is a very serious complaint. And it's also, that you would commit suicide when your love is thwarted, or when you discover that your beloved is untrue, or something like that. This is a thing that happens with some regularity in medieval romance. So it's definitely part of the world that Malory is kind of entering into from a literary perspective, right? Now, James Stevens, I agree. James is pointing out that, Balin at least tried to stop the damsel from killing herself, right? And his failure to stop her from killing herself is what led to his, striking the dolorous stroke, right? James, the thing I would add there is when you see, like, what Sir Gawain does and what King Pellinor does, or what King Pellinor fails to do here, doesn't it make Sir Balin look better and better, right? Doesn't, in retrospect, Sir Balin kind of come across better and better? Again, even, I know, who was it who was saying this? Oh, Jennifer at the beginning was saying, when I was making the joke about the preemptive decapitation of the Lady of the Lake, she was like, Sir Balin did something right. Well, again, in retrospect, it's harder and harder to blame him. But anyway, Tara's wondering if committing suicide by a damsel is considered the female equivalent of a knight dying in battle. Well, that's hard to say. There isn't really an equivalent. I mean, I can see what you mean in the sense, Tara, that, being involved in, sort of high level courtly love relationships is sort of the battlefield for women, right? I mean, it's the sort of the greatest game that they get to be a part of in that. And so, but it's not the same. I mean, the sense of like putting yourself on the line for, to prove your worship, right? To defend, what is right and things like that. That's not always the number one reason you do it, but it's often a reason. There's no real equivalent for that with ladies. I mean, you'll notice, Tara, in some ways, the closest thing that we get as an equivalent, it's not like committing suicide is especially like particularly virtuous among women. Like you'd cement your reputation by doing so or something like that. But think about the role that Guinevere plays with Gawain, right? And just the last, just a couple slides back at the end of last time, when she forms up an inquest of ladies, right? She sort of appears at the head of a judiciary panel of ladies. That, I think, is pretty much the highest sort of independent honor, independent meaning independent of like the political status of their husbands or anything, that a woman can achieve. Guinevere is doing something fairly significant there, in sort of passing judgment on Sir Gawain and sentence on Sir Gawain, right at the head of this quest of ladies. Tara, that's where I would go to as sort of the nearest sort of equivalent. But again, there isn't really there's not competition, right? In the same way, so it's just not the same. David Urbach is wondering, would they count a damsel's love to be unworthy or untrue if she refused to kill herself for sorrow at her lover's death? Well, I don't know about that. See, I don't know that suicide is required, It's like understood, but I don't think it's required. As far as I can see, it's perfectly okay to like languish in misery for a really long time. I don't think anyone's gonna be like, why haven't you offed yourself yet? I don't think so. I think that the only thing that's really shameful is being unfaithful, right? Whether that means cheating, just giving your love to somebody else when you've promised it to another, or even just like, kind of being fickle, right? Changing your mind, falling away, that's serious negative consequences. Jennifer's wondering if you could build a fancy tomb for your dead lover and live out your life tending it. Yeah, no, I think that would be acceptable. People would take that. And yes, Milthalia, just to be clear, it is absolutely true that suicide is a very serious deal. And you see why, right? The medieval church was sort of ruthlessly logical about suicide. Think of the mechanisms involved, or let me tell you about the mechanisms if you don't know the mechanisms involved. How is sin forgiven, right? You are forgiven through the death of Christ, but the death of Christ, like the forgiveness of Christ, is sort of brought to you, is sort of acquired by you, right, through the sacraments, through confession, right, and absolution that comes after confession. That's what last rites are about, right? You need to be shrived. You need to be confessed. You need to confess your sins and be forgiven of your sins. And that's why last rites is a thing, right? So that you can die cleansed of your sins. And logically speaking, of course, suicide is the only sin for which it is theoretically impossible to repent and confess and be forgiven, right? Because it's too late, right? You literally can't. So it's not that they were like, suicide is the absolute most horrible thing that anyone can do. I mean, you can see this, for instance, like in Dante's Inferno, it's not, suicide is not at the bottom of the chain or anything. It's there, right? We do meet the suicides in, what was it, the 6th circle of hell, I think, but out of 9. But it's not like it is the greatest of all possible sins. It's just the only one that you cannot possibly, like, in the moment of your death, when the moment of your death is a mortal sin, you have committed murder, right? At the moment that you died, and you can't possibly be cleansed of that sin logically. So again, they were ruthlessly logical with the application of that. Sharon is remembering that this is Hamlet's explicit rationale for not killing Claudius while he was praying in Hamlet. You remember, right? He's worried that if he kills, like, that his father, Hamlet Sr., was killed without the opportunity for confession, right? Whereas if he kills Claudius now, while Claudius is praying and confessing his sins, now notice, Sharon, Hamlet is already getting all Protestant on this, right? Like, as if, like, to a medieval Catholic, kneeling in your private closet in prayer wouldn't really have anything to do with being shriven of your sins, right? Because you have to undergo the sacrament of confession and absolution if you're a medieval Catholic. Whereas, again, it's one of the sacraments that the Protestants jettisoned, right? But anyway, but still, it's the same idea. You're absolutely right. The same kind of impulse. Mathalio, exactly. When you commit suicide, you rob yourself of the opportunity of absolution. Murderers can be forgiven. It's not like murder is the unforgivable sin. It's not. But if you kill yourself, it's logically impossible for you to be absolved. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's yes. But see, here again, in one, I see people are debating, what if you mortally wound yourself, leaving yourself time to repent and be forgiven before you bleed out or something? You know, it has to have happened. Like, there has to be a case on the books of that. I'm not sure how it was handled, but yeah, I theoretically that would work, but yeah, not really sure. But anyway, yeah, exactly. Nancy says, good old religious rules lawyering. That's exactly, that would be exactly it. Anyway, the point, though, the larger point that I want to make is this is one of many times when you see, not only in medieval literature as a whole, but that we will see in Malory, you know, there's a gap between theory and practice, right? Or at least, well, that is undoubtedly true. It is also true that there's a gap between theory and story, right? The stories that we tell are often things that don't line up with what we actually believe. I've already talked about this in like judicial combat, right? Judicial combat, not only, it's not like it's a thing that the church has just recently condemned. The church condemned that ages ago. It's never been okay. It's never been okay in the Middle Ages for there to be judicial combat. The church condemned that. And yet it's a thing, right? Because it's part of the story tradition. So the story tradition is very, very much alive in the story tradition, even though it doesn't, like, normally official, it doesn't, you know, normally officially happen. So anyway, this is just it's one reason why you always do have to be careful. You have to be careful with thinking about stuff like that. That is to say, we can know that suicide is a really big deal, and it clearly was. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we are safe using that as a framework to direct our own responses to the story. That is to say, I do not get the sense at all that as we're seeing these damsels dropping right and left, I mean, how many damsels have impaled themselves with their lovers' swords already at this point, right? I mean, it's a lot, and we're only a fifth of the way through the book. So, and do I get the sense that Malory is expecting us to hear like a story like this and be like, oh my goodness, and she's going straight to hell? No, I don't think so. It's sad. It's tragic, right? Think about the Sir Balin case, right? When Sir Balin attempts and fails to prevent the lady killing herself, right? The beloved of the Prince of Ireland, right? The one for which he got sort of sentenced to the dolorous stroke. When Merlin comes and condemns him, he doesn't condemn the damsel. Merlin doesn't, right? It's all about like, Sir Balin, it was your duty to make sure she didn't do this, right? You should have tried to, like, she was in a sense under his protection because he was right there, right? You should have stopped her, he says. But he's not like, because now she has damned her soul for all eternity. That never comes up, right? It's sad. It's a loss. It's tragic. But it's not, it can also be, and this, Tara, kind of comes back to your question from before, it can also be just a little bit heroic, right? As well, in the sense that it does, I know it's not like it's required, as I was saying before. It's not like people are going to look down on you if you don't kill yourself under circumstances like this. At least, again, I don't get that impression. Like everyone's assuming that the logical thing for you to do when you're, when your lover is killed in battle is to go and kill yourself, and that you're a slacker if you don't. Again, I don't see that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see that. However, it is, nevertheless, if you do that, it seems that people are not going to be condemning you. Within the world of this story, people are not going to be condemning you. They're going to be mourning you, but also, you're going to be an exemplar of love, right? So, again, one way to think about it, this is fantasy that they're writing, right? Sir Thomas Malory knows he's writing fantasy here. This is like an alternate universe, in a sense. Often the rules of the real universe come into play, but it's, think of even the adultery stuff. Sometimes we see, the world that ladies live in these romances is sometimes really horrible. Though perhaps horrible in different ways than the real world would have been horrible. Not to say that the real world was always horrible, but it was often horrible. And when it was not usually horrible in the same ways that the thing that most, young women had to fear was not like being locked up in a tower, by their wicked, old, impotent husband, lest a dashing, virile young knight come along. That wasn't the normal experience of the average medieval woman. Their lives were horrible, though in other ways, because this is an alternate universe, right? This is fantasy. And I think that there are definitely ways, some particular ways, in which we can see there's this kind of suspension of disbelief, right? In the real world, if this were to happen in real life, yes, like the priest would be saying, remember again, Sharon, back to Hamlet, right? We're going to be really, it's unlikely, right, that Ophelia is going to get buried in consecrated ground, which you'll remember was an issue. The gravediggers were talking about that, right? Now, at least Ophelia's suicide was not, you could argue that it was an accident, right? So you can kind of justify bearing Ophelia from Hamlet in consecrated ground, you can't justify burying someone like this in consecrated ground, and they wouldn't have. Right, again, so in real life, she's going to be buried at the crossroads, and not in, so there would have been real, but that doesn't come up in the story because it's fantasy, right? And in this fantasy, the story of true love and the effect of love and the what people are driven to by the passions of love, that's a big part of this particular fantasy world element. Both Veronica and Karita are saying, death by childbirth. Yes. Your 33% chance of dying in childbirth is a perfect example of how your life is going to be, may well have been horrible in a different way. That does not often feature. There are not very many stories of wives dying in childbed. It does not happen very often in medieval stories, though it happened a lot in the medieval world, of course. Mike says being overwrought about love is a virtue in stories of this kind. Yes, sort of, kind of. Again, what I'm wanting to do here, I've been trying to resist, though I'm being sloppy here this evening, trying to resist talking about courtly love because it's dangerous. It was a whole thing, right? I mean, there was a whole elaborate system built up. The reason I'm being cautious about it is not that I'm trying to cast doubt on whether or not it was really a whole thing. It totally was. But the question is, you don't want to just assume that every work written about courtly love prior to Malory applies here, right? He's working within that tradition, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he is, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's using it all, and we don't know what bits he's using, So again, what we're best off doing is sort of seeing what we can build from within here, right? And Mike, I agree. Your word overwrought is a good one, right? One of the things that we see in this text so far, we don't see a lot of, just to give a couple of examples quickly. One of the primary elements of courtly love stories throughout the High Middle Ages are the demandingness of the lady, right? That she is going to insist that the knight prove himself in various and often outlandish ways, right? That's not been a major element so far. Not to say it's never going to come up, and we're going to see a shadow of it in a sense later today if we ever possibly get there. But that's not been a primary thing that we've seen, right? The idea of the lady as the dominant ruler whom the knight is serving as a servant and who is at her will, and that she can command him to do whatever she wants him to do, and he is bound to do it as her lover in order to prove his truth and faithfulness. That was a huge element of the courtly love tradition, and we've not seen that, right? So again, I don't want to be assuming this is one of the elements of courtly love, so it must be in place here. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe Malory's not interested in that. However, clearly, one of the things that he is interested in is this whole element of love as an overmastering passion, which when you are love is a thing that happens to you whammo out of the blue, and you can't fight it, and it consumes you, and it drives you to do often irrational and sometimes horrible things, right? Remember Sir Balin's very brief friendship with the guy who decapitates his unfaithful beloved and her lover, and then kills himself, right? That's the kind of thing we've seen so far. This is the kind of thing we've seen so far. I'm so upset at the death of my lover that I'm gonna run myself through with his sword. That's exactly the kind of thing that he seems to focus on so far. Stephen, that's a really interesting comparison. Stephen says, Stephen Cover says, like in modern times, zombies are a popular theme in stories, but not every author follows the same rules about zombies. Yes, exactly. Or vampires, I would say similarly, right? Just because it's a vampire story doesn't mean that everything that, Bram Stoker said about Dracula applies here, right? Yeah, exactly. So the best thing to do when you're reading a vampire story, again, don't rely on what you know about Dracula, right? You got to read the vampire story and see how do the rules work here. Similar kind of premise here. Anyhow, but yeah, I would say so far, I do think, Mike, just as you were suggesting, the dominant element of the love, the amorous angle of these stories has been the overmastering passion of love, and how suddenly it comes, how little choice you have about it really, and what extremities it drives you to do. Okay, but let's keep going. So if only we knew more about this lady who just killed herself, and what would happen here. But fortunately, we briefly still have Merlin. King Pellinore comes back and reports back about his quest. "Ah, King Pellinore," said Queen Guinevere, "ye were greatly to blame that ye saved not this laddie's life." "Madam," said King Pellinore, "ye were greatly to blame, and ye would not save your own life, and ye might." Look at that. Here's King Pellinore being like, "It's your job not to commit suicide, lady, not mine." All right, Pellinore. "But, salve your displeasure, I was so furious in my quest that I would not abide, and that repenteth me, and shall do, days of my life." "Truly, you ought sore to repent it," said Merlin, "for that laddie was your own doctor, oh, snap, begotten of the laddie of the rule. And that knecht that was dead was her love, and should have wedded her. And he was a right good knecht of a young man, and would have proved a good man. And to this court was he coming, and his name was Sir Miles of the Lowndes. And a knecht come behind him, and slew him with a spear, and his name was Lorraine le Sauvage, a false knecht and a cowherd. And she for great sorrow and dole slew herself with his sword, and her name was Elaine. And because ye wold not abide and help her, ye shall see your best friend fail you, when ye be in the greatest distress that ever ye were, other shall be. And that penance God hath ordained you for that deed, that he that ye should trust most on of any man on live, he shall leave you there, ye shall be slain." "Me forethinketh it," said King Pellinore, "that thus shall me betide, but God may well fordo destiny." Okay, so first of all, so you'll notice I was saying before that I think that it was indeed a sinful request and that this prayer would not be approved. I stand by that statement, right? Despite the fact that Merlin says this is just what God's going to do, right? Again, this is how the fantasy world works. And you could kind of smell that, right? When she said it, when she prayed that prayer, again, if our response is like, I think this is not only testing the Lord your God, but testing the Lord your God in a fairly inappropriate way, right? I think that God is unlikely to grant that prayer, and I think it's probably sinful to make that prayer. But that's not the world we're in. Obviously not the world we're in, right? Again, I still think that that's probably what a real, actual living priest would have said, but that is not, that's not Merlin's logic. And that's not how this story works. Yeah. So let's see. Hang on a second. Nancy is wondering how many children Pellinore has strewn about the countryside. David Atlee was thinking the same thing. I know. I know. Yeah. David Urbach and Arthur are both wondering about him being a cowherd. He's not. I don't think that this means that Sir Miles. No, not Sir Miles. Sir Lorraine Le Savage literally herds cows, like Ares the cowherd, who was the unwitting foster father of Sir Tor. Right. No, he was literally a cowherd, and they meant no insult in calling him a cowherd because he literally herded cows, right? But I think that Lorraine Le Savage calling him a cowherd does mean what that means coward, I believe, in the modern sense. So yes, the modern word coward derives from cowherd. It's another one of those villain words, right? Which was originally a class marker and became an insult of virtue, right? Yeah. So yeah. Several of you are remarking on the. Well, I was trying to decide between saying prolific or never mind. Anyway, yeah, all of the above. Yeah, King Palinor that's apparently been a busy guy, and he doesn't know this daughter either. But yeah. So Joe, salve your displeasure. But so salve, that's like save, save your displeasure. I was so so like it doesn't mean despite. It means like I can't think of a good modernization of that phrase. But I can't think of a good way to say this. This phrase survives for a long time. Like you can still hear people in 19th century novels saying the same phrase. Things like, but save your honor. It means something like vaguely like, excuse me, right? That is salve your displeasure. I was so furious in my quest. He's like, so, like acknowledging that you're unhappy, that you don't like this, right? So he's like kind of excusing him. He's acknowledging that she doesn't approve of his action, but he's gonna like explain or defend his action. And he's not saying like, I'm ignoring or I don't care about how you thought of it. I'm acknowledging how you thought of it, but I'm going to explain why I did it and what I was thinking. If anybody can think of a good modernization of that phrase, but save your displeasure. I was so furious in my quest. I can't think of it. With all due respect, something like that. Yeah, at least that phrase is often used in a similar way. Yeah, with all due respect is an interestingly applied phrase often, I think. But yeah, that's actually a pretty good modern translation, I think, of that phrase. Mythgard says, I know you're upset, but something like that, yeah. No offense, Mike, that's interesting. Yeah, something like that. Joe is wondering, does he mean it disrespectfully? No. He's being respectful, right? He's sort of, if he just said, if she said, you were greatly to blame that you saved not this lady's life, and he was like, dude, I was so furious on my quest that I wouldn't abide. Like, it could sound like he's just dismissing her, right? So by adding that phrase, he is conveying, I am not dismissing your reaction, but I'm explaining, right? So it is meant respectfully. Yeah. Begging your pardon. Yeah, in a sense. Yeah, actually, in some ways. Yeah. I think those things convey the kind of the general sense of it, but that's a tough one. Yeah. Okay. All right, what else was I going to... Oh, so yeah, people are asking about the Lady of the Rule. I have no idea. The Lady of the Rule, that sounds like a big deal, right? I have no idea who the Lady of the Rule is. I mean, yeah, no, I've got nothing on the Lady of the Rule. I mean, when you talk about the rule with a capital R, I mean, it generally means you're generally talking about like a monastic or fraternal order when you talk about the rule, like the Benedictine rule or the Augustinian rule, or something like that. That is the set of oaths that a monk or a nun or a friar swears to. I cannot imagine. So I can't imagine that Merlin is saying, "Oh yeah, you remember that like abbess that you slept with? This is her daughter." I can't believe that that's what he's saying, and that he would say it that way. Yeah, so I don't really. Like I said, that's the only thing I got for rule with a capital R, and it just does not make sense to me. So I think it can't be right. So I have no idea. Yeah. So, okay. Dolores Stroke says there's a devotion to Our Lady of the Rule started by St. Augustine. Okay. But still identifying her as the Lady of the Rule, I still don't see how this, but yeah, Tarloniel says, I don't ever let Pellinor into your convent. Under the circumstances, given his track record, I'm saying that's a good plan anyway. I don't know that I would want King Pellinor in a convent, really. Yeah, who knows? Again, I think if she were the daughter of an abbess or something, that would have been made a slightly bigger deal of. But maybe not. Anyway, so the lady's prayer / curse comes back on him, and comes back on him as a curse / prayer, right? Because of this, what she prayed is going, in fact, to come back around on him. And notice that Merlin calls it a penance. That's an important word. It's a weighted word. I mentioned confession and absolution before as the mechanisms by which forgiveness and thereby salvation comes, right? Well, there's a middle term, right? What comes between confession and absolution? Penance is what comes between confession and absolution. So by characterizing this as a penance, it's interesting because it sounds like a curse, right? Yes, I mean, it sounds like a curse. And here's Merlin saying, no, it's not a curse. It's a penance, right? God is going to ordain this penance for you for that deed. And that's good, right? That's a good thing. It's a good thing because penance is good. Even if penance is painful, even if penance is seems undesirable and bad, in the sense of bringing suffering or whatever, it is for a good end. It is part of the absolution process. It's part of the cleansing process. So Pellinor is not going to be like exactly punished for this. He's going to be set a penance for this, which from the outside looks a lot like a punishment, but is ultimately for his good and not for his ill, in other words. So anyway, notice one last thing here, Pellinor's final statement. Me forthinketh it, that thus shall me betide. Basically he's saying, okay, I wish that weren't the case, right? I would gladly have it otherwise, but God may well foredue destiny. God might change his mind, right? God might make it happen otherwise. He says at the end, Merlin has just predicted what's going to happen. And Pellinor's response is, well, it's not carved in stone yet, right? Lots of things can happen. We'll see. which is a really interesting response, especially in this context with Merlin, as we've been kind of talking about before, with all of Merlin's predictions, right? Pelinor's one of the first people who hears a prediction that Merlin says and is like, maybe so, maybe not. We'll see how it pans out, right? And that's really interesting that he has that response. And yes, several of you are pointing out that Nancy says, I said it wasn't carved in stone yet, and Nancy says, which is odd given Merlin's track record. Yeah, he should have thought to carve it on something first. So we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, he hasn't gotten out the gold paint, Mythaliel, so it might still be all right. We'll see. But we'll come back to that subject in just a minute. First, the very end of the wedding is a really interesting moment, because this is where we get the oath that Arthur institutes for the Knights of the Round Table, right? And we've talked about places where like we're looking for the guidance of the text in telling us like what are the virtues, right? What are the standard for judgment of whether or not a thing is a good thing or a bad thing within the story? Well, here's a good one, right? Here's the actual oath that Arthur's knights are taking. So, okay. Thus, when the quest was done of the White Hart, the which followed Sir Gawain, and the quest of the Brachet, which followed Sir Tor, King Pelinor's son, and the quest of the Lady, that the Knicht took away, which at that time followed King Pellinor, then the king stablished all the Knichtes, and gave them riches and londes, and charged them, here we go, and charged them never to do outrage, nor murder, and always to flee treason, and to give mercy unto him that asketh mercy, upon pain of forfeiture of their worship and lordship of King Arthur for evermore, and always to do ladies, damosels, and gentlewomen, and widows succour, strength them in her riches, and never to enforce them upon pain of death. Also, that no man take no battles in a wrongful quarrel, for no love, nay for no world's godes. Okay. So what do we see here? And Nancy said she threw that one in for Sir Gawain. I'm thinking, when he talks about never to enforce them upon pain of death, is he looking over his spectacles at King Pellinor here? I don't know. Yeah, Karina's wondering for a clarification, the rules about how to treat women, are these all about upper class women? Yeah, no, that's fairly explicit, right? Ladies, damosels, and gentlewomen, and widows. Does that mean poor widows might kind of sneak in the back door there? Maybe, possibly, but yeah, no, it's mostly noble women. Yeah, that's, you can't really hide from that fact. But as long as we're on the subject, what are we supposed to do with women? Okay, we've got to give them succor, right? To help them when they need help. And notice what is explicitly pointed out, like the kind of succor that they're most likely to need is to strengthen him in herictis, which is really interesting, right? Women will often have men who try to take away their rights, like if they own property or if they are inheriting property. So like say you've got the only child of a landed person who is a woman, right? And a knight comes in and says, hi, I'm going to come in and capture you and marry you by force, and then I get all your lands, right? That's the kind of thing that Arthur's knights are being strictly enjoined to get in the way of, right? Strength women in their rictus, widows as well, right? Widows inherit the property of their husbands. A widow is one of the only sort of women, class of women who really do and can and did historically operate on a sort of equal playing field from an economic standpoint and political standpoint with men. Just ask the wife of Bath. That's why she's a professional widow. But anyway, yeah. Anyway, so let's see. What was I doing now? Oh yeah. So you're going to strengthen them in herictis and not to enforce them upon pain of death, right? So that's a big deal, right? Now, is this a declaration against sexual violence, yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, that's obviously covered in this, but this is more than that as well, right? Again, that scenario that I was just describing about like the knight who comes and says, I'm going to marry you and therefore get all your lands. Such a knight would also be enforcing that woman in this context, right? So you're supposed to help anyone who's in that situation. And, oh, by the way, it might go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyhow. Don't you be the aggressor in that situation or you'll be killed, right? But backing up a little bit. They're not supposed to do outrage, nor murder. Murder means murder. Don't do outrage or murder. So not committing murder is a really interesting and important thing, right, for knights. I mean, you'd think like killing people is their business, right? That's their day job, right? But there's a big difference between killing somebody and committing murder. It's a very big deal. Again, Sir Balin's story gives us a perfect example of this, right? What Sir Garland, the Invisible Knight, did was murder. Just coming up. What happened to poor Sir Miles, right? The lover of King Pelinor's daughter, right? Who killed herself in the previous slide, or rather, we were talking about in the previous slide. He was murdered, right? Somebody came up and stabbed him from behind. That's murder, right? To kill someone in clean combat, you know, when you're both, you're both engaged in combat, that's not murder, right? And often this is not exactly a fine line. What Gawain was trying to do to the knight who begged mercy, that was murder too. Had he succeeded in decapitating the man, he would have been guilty of murdering him. Needless to say, he was guilty of murdering the woman who, though again, you could say that was manslaughter, right? Because he wasn't intending to kill her. She just like threw herself in the way of his sword. But anyway, the point is, murder is a big deal, but accusations of murder get thrown around. It is not uncommon, for instance, remember the debate between Sir Balin and the old lady of the lake, for instance, right? She was upset with him because he killed her brother. But it seems likely, knowing Sir Balin and his prowess in battle, it sounds like her brother was killed in battle. And she's accusing him of murder, like, you killed my brother, which he probably did kill her brother, right? But he didn't necessarily murder her brother, which is his defense. Like, oh yeah, I totally killed that guy, but I didn't murder him, right? We fought in fair combat. Whereas, like, you falsely accused my mother and got her burned at the stake, that's a different deal, right? That is not only murder, that is also treason. Treason, you notice how often the word treason keeps coming up in this section, right? People committing treason all the time. And it is very clear that treason is not a political thing. Treason is any kind of betrayal, really any kind of dishonorable act, frankly. Certainly the knight who came up behind Sir Miles and stabbed him in the back was a treasonous act on his part. Any kind of betrayal, it's is it interchangeable with treachery? Well, no. Mytholio, I would say it's broader actually than treachery. Treachery, right? Treachery is when you agree to something and then you back out on it, right? Like you say, oh, I promise I won't attack you, and then you attack, right? Or when you have an alliance with somebody and then you stab them in the back, right? That's treachery. Where treason, as it's used here, is much more, it's broader. I mean, those things would be treason in the way that Malory uses the word, definitely. But like a cheap shot is treason as well, like against an acknowledged enemy, not breaking an alliance or backstabbing. I mean, I shouldn't say backstabbing because we've just had an instance of backstabbing, which is not the kind of thing I'm talking about. Literal backstabbing. No, what I mean is again, the betrayal of trust. Treachery is about the betrayal of trust to some extent or other, right? And that's a really big deal. But treason, yeah, Stephen, it is broader than those in the ninth circle of the Inferno. Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it seems to be like a knight who acts dishonorably is going to be accused of treason, right? Sir Gawain is a treasonous knight. He is. I mean, his plan to murder King Pellinor, that's treason, right? And Gaheris being all like, wait till I'm a knight and then I'll help you kill him. That's treason too. Let's wait till we get him somewhere alone so that we can both set on him and kill him in order to avenge our father. That's a treasonous act. By the way that Malory is using the word treason. So yeah, always to flee treason. So always act honorably, right? Always be straightforward, always play fair, always, be sort of out in the open. Some were asking about what are the boundaries of outrage. I don't know the legal definition of outrage. I get the vague impression that the way it specifies do outrage nother morther is specifying, like murder is a subset of outrage, right? Like the one that it's specifying. Outrage being the broader category. So like never to do outrage, like don't commit crimes, right? But especially violent crimes. To, I don't know, decapitate a lady, that's an outrage, right? It's murder too, but I mean, it's murder as well, I should say. But it's definitely outrage. Yeah. I mean, and this is vague, and again, I could be wrong. There could be a more precise definition that I don't know of. But get criminal acts, essentially. Don't do anything criminal. And don't do anything dishonorable. That's why you've got first outrage and murder, and then flee treason, right? To attack somebody at unawares, when they're not ready for it. That's treason. That's treason. It's not necessarily outrage, and it might not be murder. It could end up as murder, right? But it could definitely be treason. And so we've got negative things. These are the things to avoid, and then give mercy unto him that asketh mercy. That's a baseline, right? Upon pain of forfeiture of their worship and lordship of King Arthur forevermore. And yes, this is the one where he's like, Sir Gawain, I'm looking at you, right? Very topical for the moment. He's making it explicitly wrong. If Gawain ever does that again, he is going to forfeit all of the worship and all of the lordship that he has of King Arthur. All of the lands that Arthur has given him, all of the positions and titles that Arthur has given him, he will no longer be Arthur's vassal. If he will be cast out, if he does that again. Anybody will be who does that again. And then we talked about the ladies, and that no man talk no battles in a wrongful quarrel for no love, nay for no world's goodness. Don't battle in a wrongful quarrel. So often you're going to be fighting for a particular quarrel. Like quarrels are going to be resolved by battles. You've got two landowners who are arguing about something. How do you resolve this? You resolve this by each one of you get a champion, you have them fight, and then the outcome determines the outcome of the complaint. That's a thing that we're going to see. Of course, we'll see it very soon in the story of Arthur and Accolon. But if you know that you are in the wrong, right? If you know that this dude is in the wrong, don't fight for him. Don't take the battle in a wrongful quarrel, neither for love nor for world is goodness. And this is really important because it shows the priorities here, right? Worldly goods should not come above honor, right? Fighting for what is right. Love, very importantly, right? Love should not come above what is right. Don't fight for somebody whom you know to be in the wrong just because your beloved asked you to, right? So that's important. That's interesting. Yana says there's nothing encouraging you to find out if you're championing for an honorable person. Well, no, it's about the quarrel in question, right? I mean, the person whose quarrel you're taking might be a jerk, might even be a criminal, right? But if he is in the right in that quarrel, it would be defensible for you to. Now, you might say you don't want to champion this guy because you think he's a jerk, but you're still fighting for the right in this case, right? Sarah and David are both similarly asking, like, so what does he mean by love here? Is this just about sexual love? David is wondering, does it, so like, don't fight for your brother if he's in the wrong, like, that kind of love as well. I think no love could possibly encompass that, but it's almost certainly, I think in the context, it's almost certainly talking about sexual love. This is talking about those, you still do things for your lady. That's still a thing. Again, it's, as I said, it's not been really emphasized. This raises it here, right? This prospect of love might put, your amorous entanglements might place you in this position. Don't prioritize that over what's right. That's what this oath says. This oath has a higher priority than what you owe to your beloved, which is a big deal, which is important, I think, in the circumstances. All right, let's keep pushing along. So on a time, he, that is Merlin, of course, told to King Arthur that he, that is Merlin, should not endure long, but for all his crafties he should be put into the earth quick. Quick, of course, means alive. Quick is the opposite of dead. So he's like, I'm about to be, before too long now, I'm almost due for my living interment, right? I'm going to be buried alive before too long. And so he told the king many things that should befall, but always he warned the king to keep well his sword and the scabbard, for he told him who the sword and the scabbard should be stolen by a woman from him that he most trusted. Also he told King Arthur that he should miss him. He, Arthur, should miss Merlin. And yet had ye lever than all your Londes have me again. Ah, said the king, as if he had just thought of this incredibly new and daring thought. Sin ye knew of your evil adventure, purvey for it, and put it away by your crafties, that misadventure. Now, this is a genius plan, right? Arthur's finally thought of this. Wait a second. Since you know in advance that you're going to be buried alive in the earth, why don't you, plan ahead? Like, maybe avoid getting buried alive since you know it's coming, right? How about that? Try that. Nay, said Merlin, it will not be. Oh. All right. Merlin is like, it doesn't work that way. Which is really interesting, especially in this context, right? All the things that he's told Arthur, including the one he just told Arthur, right? I mean, remember, Arthur has already given the scabbard, we were told, given the scabbard to Morgan Le Fay, right? And here's Merlin saying, some woman who shall remain nameless, who you trust a lot, shall steal the scabbard from you. So be especially careful about the scabbard. And Arthur, right, just does not think of it at all. Deborah is asking, does he not want to bother to avoid it, Merlin, or is he taking the adventure that God shall ordain? I think it's closer to the latter, Deborah, but I don't think it's... See, the difference between Sir Balin and Merlin, and boy, could you finish that sentence in a lot of ways. But the one difference between Balin and Merlin is that Merlin knows, right? There's like an if clause for Balin, right? Like, if this is what has to be, then I will accept the adventure that God ordains for me, right? When he... Merlin, there's no if, right? He knows, like, this is what's going to happen. So, like, it will not be. He's like, oh, no, you're not understanding here, right? I'm not saying, like, I think that this is a thing that might happen, in which case, like, he could purvey against it, right? No, he's like, this is good. Like, it's done. This is going to happen. He is saying this because he knows it's going to happen. It will not be. It's not going to be possible for me to put it away by my crafts. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Dolores Stroke is a little bit disappointed in Merlin's lack of a response here, right? Would have been great to have a little bit of a time travel / prophecy discussion from Merlin about how he can't avoid being buried alive, and all you get is, nope, not an option, right? And I'm not going to explain. So this is the moment, we were talking about this before. This is the moment where Arthur raises this question about, like, hey, maybe we should try avoiding these terrible things that you're predicting are going to happen, armed with that knowledge, you know. But Merlin says it's impossible. It's not, he cannot avoid it. So anyway, yeah. Exactly, Tarloniel. That's how the story goes. Merlin knows how the story goes. You can't change how the story goes. Malory is doing a new version of the Arthur story, but he's not just telling a wacky alternative universe version, right? It's still going to happen. I guess the one way in which it's a wacky alternative universe version is that, like, Sir Gawain is a treasonous murderer, but apart from that, it's, you know, operating within the rules, right? Okay. And then it comes upon him. So, okay. So the lady that Merlin falls in love with is the lady that King Pellinore brought back. So she's the one who came in. She was the one who was making all the noise. Remember when King Arthur, in one of my favorite sentences in the book, was like, oh, phew, at least finally a little peace and quiet, right after the lady gets hauled away. That was Nimue, who gets hauled away. So King Pellinore rescues her and brings her back, and she turns out to be the one, right? The one who Merlin falls in love with. At what point was she always a Lady of the Lake? Did she get promoted to Lady of the Lake at some point? Was she Lady of the Lake already when she... I mean, she didn't lead with that when she came in asking for her brachet. Was it a brachet of the lake? Right? Was this a lake issue? Right? In that earlier quest, we don't know any of those things. Right? She's just called the lady, and then suddenly she becomes the Lady of the Lake, or like he starts referring to her as the Lady of the Lake later on down the road. Anyway, okay. Then soon after the laddie and Merlin departed, and by ways he showed her many wonders, and so come into Cornwall. And always he lie about to have her maidenhood, and she was ever passing weary of him, and would have been delivered of him, for she was afeard of him, for cause he was a devil's son, and she could not be skift of him by no mean. Skiffed is a great word, by the way. Yeah, she can't be rid of him. Like, she can't be set free from him. She can't be skiffed of him. Yeah, she's not into you, Merlin. She is just not into you. And so, on a time, Merlin did show her in a roch, whereas was a great wonder, and wrought by enchantment that went under a great stone. So, by her subtle working, she mad Merlin to go under that stone, to lat her wit of the marvels there. But she wrought so there for him, that he come never out for all the craft he could do. And so she departed and left Merlin. Okay. Both Tarloniel and Carita at the same time said, okay, I'm kind of on the lady's side here. Yeah, I absolutely get that. Absolutely get that. Merlin is making a pest of himself, right? He is pressing his amorous attentions upon this lady, right? There's no two ways about it, right? He is trying to get her in bed, and she is not into him, but she is afraid to turn him away, and he won't take a hint anyway, right? She says no, he won't take no for an answer. Now, he's not raping her, but he's plaguing the life out of her, right? He won't leave her, he's stalking her. So he, and again, but she goes with him, right? She travels with him and everything because she's in a difficult place. She does not want to give in to him, but she also is afraid of him, for cause he was a devil's son. Now, this is the first we've heard of this. This is the first reference to Merlin being the son of a devil that we've gotten yet. Okay, so one other thing I would draw your attention to, he is not a son of the devil. He is a son of a devil. That is, and sometimes this is said differently. He's said to be the son of a devil that is an airish spirit, an incubus, essentially. Not Satan. He's not the son of Satan. He's not the Antichrist, or it's nothing that bad. Remember when we were talking way back when we were talking about Igraine and why she was really happy after that conference? I was trying to defend Malory's characterization of Igraine as being really happy when Uther said, like, oh yeah, no, that was me that raped you that night. So, and one of the reasons that I gave to explain her happiness is that it's got to be good news to her that her son with whom she's pregnant, the child with whom she's pregnant, is in fact the son of a mortal, right? It kind of starts there, right? There's plenty of good news for Igraine in this speech of Uther, like in the revelation of this fact. But it starts with, oh great, so I was not in fact seduced by an incubus. Point one, right? Great, excellent. That's super important. That's most likely what they're saying about Merlin. So no, it turns out that Arthur was not begotten by a spiritual being who took on the form of man and lay with his mother. Though again, it looked bad. I mean, if you're Igraine, you've got to be thinking that's a very serious possibility, right? Which is why, again, one reason why I'm sure she was all kinds of relieved to find out that the dude that had sex with her in the shape of her husband was in fact a human, right? That's good news. So anyway, good news. Merlin apparently is, we're told, the child of a devil, one of these airish spirits. Okay. What does that mean? What are the implications of that? Notice Merlin has never been there's no question of Merlin being evil, right? I mean, yeah, he's doesn't cover himself with glory in this scene here, right? In his pressing his amorous attentions upon poor Nimue, but he's not like evil by nature or something. He's not like some sort of twisted, morally perverted freak or something like that. In fact, he still he has his like Old Testament prophet thing going on. Remember how we've seen him as this sort of balance of prophet and fairy. From the beginning, we've seen both of those elements very present in him. Nancy, you were saying earlier that Merlin never explains things, right? Yes, and Malory never explains Merlin. This is just tossed in there without any explanation as to what it means, what we're supposed to make of it, right? What are the implications of that? We don't know. Carita, we do know that he had a master. Yeah, he did have a master. Blois was his master. So he was the apprentice to somebody. But apprentice what? Magician? Wizard? Did he learn wizardliness? Was he learning nigromancy? Well, I don't even really know. Yeah, is it, right, Nancy says, is that why he has these prophetic powers? I mean, maybe. He's kind of different, right? But we don't really know. Yeah. So, anyhow, it's, right, Creed's wondering whether that guy was also the son of a devil. We know even much less about Blois than we know about Merlin. Anyway, so, yeah, I'm not saying this is illuminating because it's totally not illuminating. And by the way, he is not, of course, showing her a roach. He's showing her a rock. There's a great wonder under a rock. And so he's trying to impress her, right? Thinking that like showing her some hidden wonders is going to like get her in the mood, right? So he's like, hey, there are great wonders. I mean, how skanky does this sound, right? Like, hey, baby, if you come down into this subterranean cave with me, I'll show you some great wonders, right? There's some great wonders wrought by enchantment down there. Trust me, just, because this is totally not my little love nest that I prepared in advance or something like that. And she very sensibly says, how about you go down first? I'll be right there. Right? I'll follow you down. So by subtle working, she made Merlin to go under the stone, to go under that stone, to let her wit of the marvels there, to let her wit of the marvels, to let her know of the marvels there. Like, okay, go check on the marvels. Can you tell me about the marvels? Right? Go in and let me know about the marvels. Right? I'm so interested in the marvels, whatever they are, that are under this rock there. And then while he's down there, as soon as he goes in, she wrought there for him. She so wrought there for him that he could never come out for all the craft that he could do. How? How did she, by what craft did she make that happen, right? How was this wrought by her? By nigromancy? Possibly. I don't know. Dorstroke says, let me slip into something more comfortable. No, really, I'm right behind you. Yeah. Again, so she's a sorceress? Did he teach her this? Right? Did she get this out of him and then use it against him? Does she have power is she a sorceress anyway? Did she also go to the nigromancy school? Is she already the Lady of the Lake? And can she walk across the water like the old, former, now decapitated Lady of the Lake could do? Is she a fairy queen too? Does she have a palace under this other rock? right? Remember, there was an island on that lake that had a magic palace underneath a rock. So like wonders under rocks are totally a thing, and even a thing associated with ladies of the lake. We don't even know. Is she a fairy, Mike? Great question. No clue, right? Absolutely no clue. What we are told here in literally one sentence, right, is so obviously the tip of the iceberg, right? And, I can't help but think, I feel sort of forced to the conclusion that Malory is just not really interested in this stuff, right? There's obviously a backstory here. Was this some kind of like enchanter's duel here? Was this, some kind of fairy politics thing going on? Is that why he fixated on her in the first place? Because she's the lady of the lake and he's this sorcerer dude who's obviously associated with fairy and knows about it and acts like a fairy and goes up and asks for people to give him their kids, and as we saw in the opening classes and stuff. So he has some connection with the world of fairies, she has some connection with the world of fairies. Is this again part of this whole other story that's going on, which is only tangentially interested in King Arthur's story? And Merlin is not Merlin, sorry, Freudian slip. Malory is not very interested in that story. But we still get it because it kind of bubbles through the Arthur story. But he never explains it or even really sort of thinks about it at all. It's David Atlee says it's a slightly more detailed version of by means. Yes, by means she entombed him in the rock. Yeah, exactly. I definitely, these passages in Malory are so tantalizing, but ultimately I always find them frustrating because, again, there's so much there that he could talk about and that he obviously just absolutely does not talk about. You can tell what Malory is more interested in, namely tournaments and knightly combat. That's what is really good about Arthur's story, obviously. Not this fairy magic stuff, but it's there and it's cool, local color, but it's not the whole story, and we're never going to really know who the story is. See, this is the kind of thing that we like, right? Okay, so here's Sir Kay's greatest moment. We got the war with the 5 kings. We've already had the war with the 11 kings, which was pretty good. And now there's these other 5 kings that rise up to fight against Arthur. And then they, rather foolishly, these 5 monarchs, go riding themselves together with no accompaniment by night, right? And Sir Kay is like, hey, guys, look. So Sir Kay and Sir Gawain and Sir Griflet and who else is there? Arthur. Yeah, Arthur, right. So the 4 of them see these 5 kings riding out by night. Lo, sighed Sir Caius, yonder be thou 5 kinges. Let us go to them and match him. That were folly, said Sir Gawain, for we are but 4, and they be 5. That is truth, said Sir Griflet. No force, said Sir Caius. I will undertake for 12 of the best of him, and then may ye 3 undertake for all the other 3. And therewithal Sir Kay let his horse ren as fast as he meeked to encounter with one of them, and struck one of the kinges through the shield and also the body a fathom, and the king fell to the earth stark dead. That saw Sir Gawain, and ran unto another king so hard that he smote him down and threw the body with a spear, that he fell to the earth dead. Anon Sir Arthur ran to another, and smote him through the body with a spear, that he fell to the earth dead. Then Sir Griflet ran to the 4th king, and gaf him such a fall that his neck brak in sunder. In sunder? Like literally in sunder, like his head rolled away. Anyway, then Sir Kay ran unto the 5th king, and smote him so hard on the helm that the stroke clave the helm and head to the earth. That was well stricken, said King Arthur, and worshipfully hast thou hold thy promise. Therefore I shall honour thee while that I live. My guess, a fathom. So yeah, his spear is sticking out a fathom length out the back of the king there. So Deborah says these kings were just minding their own business, right? Well, no. I mean, they're the aggressors. They've taken the field against Arthur, right? Now, like, they're not necessarily out harassing the countryside here together, but this is under declaration of war. This is not treason, right? This is fair knightly combat, sort of knight to knight and monarch to monarch. Now, David, you'll notice that King Arthur is often called Sir Arthur, especially when he's acting as a knight. When you see Arthur in combat, especially in knightly adventurous combat, not in like battle, like in military battle. He's often called Sir Arthur and not King Arthur. Anyway, yeah. So Dolly's wondering, were the kings even trying to fight back? I think yes. I think that they are. Why is it not mentioned? Like, why doesn't it talk about it? This is just showing how one-sided this was. I don't think it means that the five kings are being taken completely at unawares and just, stabbed through, like, as if by Sir Garland, the Invisible Knight. That I do not believe is what's happening here. This is clearly, everyone speaks of this as a very honorable and worshipful combat. I think the reason that only the blows of the good guys are detailed here is that only theirs count, right? This is just showing how marvelously one-sided this encounter ended up going. But this is remember this, because this is the high water mark of Sir Kay's worship, right? Don't forget, Sir Kay is not going to be a wonderful character for the whole rest of the story, right? He is not going to distinguish himself. And in fact, there will be times when he will do quite the reverse. But we must always remember this moment, right? Sir Kay is not just a lifelong loser who has his position through nepotism, right? Sir Kay proved himself here, not only by the work that he did here, but by boasting a great boast and then fulfilling it, right? That was really a big deal. Okay. So that now we're choosing the Knights of the Round Table. So there was the final choice. So Sir Griflet and Sir Gawain get put onto the Round Table, which is great. But there's only one more seat, and there's the choice between Sir Tor and Sir Bagdemagus, which is, I'm quite sure how you're not supposed to pronounce it, but it's too much fun for me not to pronounce it that way, so I always do. Anyway, so Sir Bagdemagus and Sir Tor are the two candidates, and Arthur chooses Sir Tor at the advice of King Pellinore, who does the whole, like, I shouldn't say anything because I'm his father, so I wouldn't say anything, except if I did say something, this is totally what I would say. And Arthur is like, I completely agree with that thing that you didn't officially say, so I'm going to choose Sir Tor and leave Sir Bagdemagus for later. Okay, so... And so they were set in Hirsages, whereof Sir Bagdemagus was wonderly wroth that Sir Tor was avounced afore him. There's somebody being wonderly wroth again, right? We haven't seen that in a while. And therefore suddenly he departed from the court, and took his squire with him, and rode long in a forest, till they come to a cross, and there he alicked, and sighed his prayers devoutly. The meanwhile his squire found written upon the cross that Bagdemagus should never return unto the court again, till he had won a knight of the Table Round, body for body. Lo, said his squire, here I find writing of you. Therefore I rede you, return again to the court. That shall I never, said Bagdemagus, till men speak of my right great worship, and that I be worthy to be a knight of the Round Table. And so he rode forth, and there by the way he found a branch of holy herb, that was the sign of the Sancreal, and no knight found no such tokens, but he were a good liver, and a man of prowess. No, that has nothing to do with his liver, Arthur, I know what you're thinking.
And so, as Sir Bagdemagus rode to see many adventures, so it happened him to come to the rock, whereas the Lady of the Loch had put... Here she's a Lady of the Lake now. The Lady of the Loch had put Merlin under the stone, and there he heard him make a great dole. That is, Bagdemagus heard Merlin making a great dole. Remember, Merlin is quick in the rock. He's alive. He's not killed. He's trapped alive. Let's see. Wherefore Sir Bagdemagus would have holpen him, and went unto the great stone, and it was so heavy that 100 men might not lift it up. When Merlin wist that he was there, he bade him leave his labour, for all was in vain. For he might never be holpen but by her that put him there. And so Bagdemagus departed, and did many adventure, and praved after a full good knecht, and come again to the court, and was made a knecht of the Round Table. So on the morn there befell new tidings and many other adventures. Okay, so first of all, I love that the first thing that happens... Notice several consequences of life after Merlin's departure, right? One, Arthur has to make a decision, which I'm not sure he makes the right call here, right? I mean, we don't know how old Sir Bagdemagus is, but you kind of get the feeling that he's being passed over for the new guy that everybody's excited about, right? So, like, was this the right decision? I mean, in the end, Sir Bagdemagus is going to be a Knight of the Round Table eventually anyway, but, you know, it's not clear. It's not clear that Arthur made the right call here. And you know Merlin would have had an opinion, right? Merlin would have told him, like, oh, no, here's what you should do, right? Now Arthur doesn't have Merlin anymore, and so what are the consequences? He alienates this knight who would otherwise have been a loyal knight and who swears off going back to Arthur's court. But as soon as he does, what happens? Right? He comes to a cross in the road, and his squire is like, sir, there's writing on this cross that says what's going to happen to you, right? He stumbles across some classic Merlin graffiti where Merlin came along with his gold pen and was like, Sir Bagdemagus will never return to Arthur's court until he had won a Knight of the Table Round body for body. And you know that Merlin came to this place and wrote it there on that cross because he knew this was where Sir Bagdemagus was going to end up when he left the court in a huff, right? So, because he knows this kind of thing, just like he knows that this tomb, you know, this random tomb is going to be the site of the great battle between Sir Lancelot and Sir Tristram, right? So on the one hand, we see the lack of Merlin, but on the other hand, there's never really a lack of Merlin, right? He is purveyed for this. He couldn't purvey against his own entombment, but by golly, he could sprinkle a few of these prophecies around so that people will know about this. Anyway, so and then of course Sir Bagdemagus finds Merlin himself, so we get this reminder. There's Merlin still alive. It makes me wonder why somebody doesn't go down and like visit Merlin. Like, you still ask his advice on stuff. Like, hey Merlin, how's it going on to the rock? Right? Yeah. So I got a few items, right, that I wanted to ask your opinion on. You could still totally do that. But Veronica, no, it's not clear that Bagdemagus tells anybody. I mean, no one. I think he's done. I think this, don't bother digging because nobody can get me out of here except for her who put me in. I kind of think those are going to be Merlin's last words, if I don't remember correctly. But, I mean, unless I remember correctly. Incorrect. Never mind. You know what I mean. I think those are his last words. Yeah. Okay. Hey, look, we get to start Arthur and Accolon. Okay. Yeah, no, let's go ahead and start this. Okay, so King Arthur and Sir Accolon and Sir Uriens, right? This is an auspicious grouping, right? So Morgan Le Fay's half-brother, the king, Morgan Le Fay's husband, the other king, who is the vassal of King Arthur, and Morgan Le Fay's adulterous lover all go out hunting together, right? Does this sound like a classic setup or what? Okay, fine. So they come across a ship. They come to a body of water and they see a boat, and there's no. It's a fantastic look. It's a richly arrayed boat, right? They go on to the ship, and there's nobody there in the ship, right? But when they go out, though there's no one in the ship magically departs and sails off with them, right? This is classic, right? If you are a knight and you see a boat, a rich boat, just sitting there waiting for you, you get in it. Obviously, like it's what you're supposed to do. This is a classic trope. We see it in several earlier chivalric romances. "Sirs," sighed the king, who has clearly read all the right books, "come thence, and let us see what is in this ship." So at the last they went into the ship all three, and found it richly behanged with cloth of silk. So by that, remember, silk is very rare and precious. So by that time it was dark night, and there suddenly was about them 100 torches set upon all the shipboardes, and it gaf great light. And therewithal there come 12 fair damosels, and saluted King Arthur on his knees, and called him by his name, and said he was right welcome, and such cheer as they had he should have of the best. Then the king thanked them fair. Therewithal they led the king and his fellows into a fair chamber, and there was a rich cloth, a cloth laid richly beseen of all that longed to a table, and there were they served of all wines and meates that they could think of. But of that the king had great marvile, for he never fared better in his life as for one supper. And so, when they have supped at her leisure, King Arthur was lad unto a chamber, a richer beseen chamber saw he never none. And so was King Uriens served, and lad into another chamber, and so Accolon was slad into the third chamber, passing richly and well besine. And so were they laid in their beddes easily, and anon they fell on sleep, and slept marvellously sore all the night. So this adventure is going great so far, right? Here you are stranded on a hunt, right? And you're like, what do you do? And we're like, oh, we'll just keep going, right? And hope that something happens. And you find the magic boat, and the magic boat takes you somewhere. You don't know where it is, but that's okay, because when you get there, you're met by these 12 fair damsels and all the magic lights, and they bring you in and give you the best supper you've ever had in your life. And then they take you, and then you're put into a great bed and have an awesome night's sleep. This is a fantastic adventure so far. And on the morn, King Uriens was in Camelot, abed in his wife's arms, Morgan le Fay. And when he woke, he had great marvile how he come there, for on the even before he was 12 days' journey from Camelot. And when King Arthur awoke, he found himself in a dark prison, hearing about him many complaints of woeful connectis. So there we go. This is it turned out not so well after all, right? It was all a front. It was all a deceit, lulling him into complacency. And then he finds himself in a dark prison where obviously many other knights have gone before him. He fell for the old magic boat trick. Again, often that's legit. We'll see this. This is not the last time we will see somebody get into a magic boat. This time it was a deception, right? And he was only being taken off his guard. Okay. And of course, it's Morgan le Fay at the back of all this. So, of course, they end up fighting the duel. Now, keep in mind, notice when we get an immediate example, Yana, as you were suggesting before, of the whole, don't fight in a wrongful quarrel thing. Arthur agrees to fight for Sir Damas against Sir Ontzlake. When it's clear that Sir Ontzlake is the good guy and Sir Damas is the bad guy, but it's also clear that Sir Damas actually has the right. He's the older son, right? So that he is probably in the right in their dispute about the land. He's just a jerk and won't fight for himself against Sir Onslake, his brother, and is acting very treasonously, and keeping these knights wrongfully in prison and starving them to death. That would be outrage, I think, and murder. But anyway, so he's a bad guy, but I think in the right about this quarrel, as Arthur will reveal. If you remember, his finding at the end, he gives Sir Damus the land. He says, but you're going to let Sir Onslake use it, and he's going to pay you rent for it. And the rent that he's going to pay you is 1 palfrey per year, because it better befits you to ride a palfrey than a courser, right? You get an effeminate little riding horse. You shouldn't have a war horse because you don't deserve it because you're a wuss, right? So I'm going to technically agree that you're in the right. I was fighting for you and you're in the right, but I'm going to not let you profit by that. And I'm going to insult you too at the same time, is how Arthur sort of resolves it in the end. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, Accolon, Sir Accolon, of course, is fighting for Sir Onslake, who would fight for himself, but he got pierced through both sides, which is through both thighs, which is an occupational hazard. And he's not going to be the last knight who's going to find himself in that position. And anyway, so here they are fighting together, and Accolon is given Excalibur and the scabbard of Excalibur, very importantly. And so Arthur has just figured this out, right? His own sword has broken. He has taken Excalibur from Accolon. Remember how that happened? How did he get Excalibur away? Remember how Accolon ended up dropping Excalibur during the battle? Because Nimue came along, the other Lady of the Lake, and Merlin's Lady of the Lake, and did not want Arthur to die. So she intervened with her crafties, which she definitely seems to have now, and led Accolon to drop the sword, and then Arthur takes the sword after he's already been beating Accolon about the head and neck with the pommel of his broken sword, right? Anyway, yeah. So okay, so we already see Nimue. She seems to be a pretty stand-up Lady of the Lake, actually. Really a counterpart here to Morgan Le Fay, who is. And she's helping to undo this whole scheme. So keep in mind one of the other rules that we're seeing very much in force here. Nobody can recognize anybody in combat. Like, it's just not possible. Notice even after this passage is Accolon answering the question, "Who are you? And where did you get this sword?" Right? Arthur's already taken his helmet off. And he's still asking him who he is. Like, even with his helmet off, he doesn't recognize him. Right now, maybe because he already bashed his face up so badly with the pommel of his sword. But anyway, that's particularly comical. But of course, Accolon still has no idea that it's King Arthur that he's been fighting with. Even though you'd think they might be close enough that he could recognize his face or that he might recognize his voice. It never happens. Almost nobody ever recognizes anybody's face or voice if you're in armor, right? It's one of the rules. A knight in armor is almost perfectly indistinguishable from any other knight in armor. Okay. "Now, sire," said Accolon, "I will tell you. This sword hath been in my keeping the most party of this 12-month, and Morgan Le Fay, King Urient's wife, sent it me yesterday by a dwarf to the intent to slay King Arthur, her brother. For ye shall understand that King Arthur is the man in the world that she hateth most, because he is most of worship and of prowess of any of her blood." That's why she hates him, because he's most of worship and prowess of any of her blood. Meaning he shows up all the rest of her blood? Is that the point? She grudges him his success? That's why she hates him most? "Also, she loveth me out of measure as paramour, and I her again. And if she micht bring it about to slay Arthur by her crafties, she would slay her husband, King Urient's lichtly. And then had she devised to have me king in this land, and so to reign, and she to be my queen. But that is no done, said Accolon, for I am sure of my death. Well, sighed King Arthur, I feel by you ye would have been king of this land, yet it had be great damage to have destroyed your lord, said Arthur. It is truth, said Accolon, but now I have told you the truth, wherefore I pray you tell me of whence ye are, and of what court. Yeah, you probably should have led with that, Sir Accolon, I gotta say. Yes, Sarah Grant is wondering if there's a silver chair somewhere involved in this scheme. Yeah, you know, those witches, Sarah, you know, they're always up to no good, aren't they? You can never trust those northern witches. Yeah. It is that actually I hadn't been thinking of the silver chair parallel with Prince Rillian, but it is a little bit like that. I mean, it's not the like stolen heir part of it, but there is a certain similarity here. Obviously, Morgan Le Fay is guilty of treason in every sense, right? She hates him. She is trying to kill him. He now has this confirmation, which arguably he should have suspected before, that she is actively trying to kill him. Accolon has had Arthur's sword, has had Excalibur for the most part of a 12-month, right? Most of the last year, Arthur's been using a fake Excalibur, right? The dummy Excalibur that Merlin gave to him. And Accolon had the scabbard until Arthur rips it away from him in the middle of the battle so that suddenly his wounds begin to bleed. Yeah, so Morgan Le Fay is now officially outed as a villainess. So she immediately goes home and tries to kill King Uriens because cat's out of the bag now, right? So you might as well at least kill your husband on the way out, I guess. It seems to be her rationale. But the maid, right, her lady in waiting, warns their son, Sir Uwaine, right, that his mom's about to kill his dad, right? So he goes and she tells him, and this is his response to the maid. Well, sighed Sir Uwaine, go on your way and let me deal. By the way, this is a phrase that I have always loved. I quote. I say this all the Sir Uwaine is not the only one who's going to use this phrase. This is a phrase that comes up quite a bit in Malory, and I love it. I use this all the time. Let me deal. So I'll be in the kitchen after dinner and my wife will say, do you need help with the dishes? And I say, no, you go ahead upstairs and let me deal. It's such a generally useful and applicable phrase. I love that phrase. Anyway, go on your way and let me deal. Anon the damosel brocht the queen the swerd with quacking hondes, and lichtly she took the swerd, that is, the queen, not the damosel, and pulled it out, and went boldly unto the bed's side, and awaited how and where she might slay him best. She's like aiming for various vital parts of his anatomy. And as she haved up the sword to smite, Sir Uwaine leapt unto his mother, and caught it by the hand, and sighed, Ah, fiend, what wilt thou do? And what wilt thou do? And thou wert not my mother. With this sword I shall smite off thine head. Ah, said Sir Uwaine, men said that Merlin was begotten of a fiend, but I may say an earthly fiend bar me. Ah, fair son Uwaine, have mercy upon me. I was tempted with a fiend, wherefore I cry thee mercy. I will never more do so, and salve my worship, and discover me not. On this covenant, sighed Sir Uwaine, I will forgive you, so ye will never be about to do such deeds. Nay, son, and that I make you assurance. Okay, so her argument, right, her defense, like she's pretty much caught in the middle of the act here, raising up the sword above her husband in order to kill him. She can't very well say, I'm not gonna kill dad, right? He's saying, if you were not my mom, I would have already decapitated you, right? Because you're obviously guilty here. And here's Uwaine. I'm like Merlin, right? They say that Merlin was begotten of a fiend, but I may say an earthly fiend bare me, right? Merlin might have been begotten by a devil. His father might have been a devil. I was born by an earthly fiend. You are, that's harsh. Tough but fair, arguably. Her defense. Fair son Uwaine, have mercy. I was tempted with a fiend, wherefore I cry thee mercy. She's not exactly saying the devil made me do it. She's not claiming to be possessed by a devil or something. She is saying that she was egged on to this by a devil, right? So what she seems to be doing is seem to be trying to take his objection, to take his, he's saying this is a fiendish thing. This is a vile, wicked, like a devilish act that I've caught you in the middle of. This proves that you are like an earthly fiend yourself. You are as wicked as a devil, he is saying to her. And she's like, oh, it's devil. Right. Yeah, no, it was a demon. It was totally a demon who suggested this, right? I was tempted with a fiend. So I was influenced by a devil, but therefore, wherefore I cry you mercy. Like, have mercy on me. I'm like totally swearing off, relationships with devils, and I won't take their advice on this score anymore. That's her defense. And he's like, okay, if you promise to stop murdering people and never kill Dad again, then I will. Notice she asks him to save her worship and discover me not, right? Don't tell anybody, right? Save my worship. Her reputation is really going to be in the hopper, right? If it gets out that she tried to murder her husband in his bed. I won't listen to devils anymore. I promise. Promise. Sarah Grant says, no more murderous satanic plots, Mom. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, son. I promise. No more. I mock you assurance. But now, Sarah, yes, and I agree. Morgan does have more agency than a lot of other women. She is a strong woman character. No two ways about that, right? She doesn't just arrange somebody to murder on her behalf. I mean, she does that too, right? With Accolon, using Accolon as a tool to kill Arthur. But she's going to kill her husband with her own hands, right? Good talk, says Milthal. Yeah. Okay, Mom. I think that went well. Yeah, but I mean, what are you going to do, right? What are you going to do when you discover that, your mother is Morgan Le Fay, right? It's tough. Poor Sir Uwaine. Well, later on, of course, Arthur tracks her down, and we have the chase scene, right, where he is coming after her. She still has the scabbard. She comes to him, right, and is going to kill him in his sleep, Arthur. And she's going to steal Excalibur again, but he's sleeping with Excalibur naked in his hand. But stupidly, because, he's doing what Merlin exactly told him not to do and valuing the sword more than the scabbard, he leaves the scabbard untended, right? So she takes the scabbard and runs off. He wakes up. They have a chase scene. Thon she rode into a valley where many great stones were, and one she saw she must be overtook. She shop herself, horse and man, by enchantment, unto great marble stones. And anon withal come King Arthur and Sir Outlock, whereas the king meeked knew his sister and her men, and unknicked from another. Ah, said the king, here may ye see the vengeance of God, and now I am sorry this misadventure is befall. Okay, so being pursued, being overtaken by Arthur and Sir Outlake, Morgan Le Fay desperately conceals herself, right? By enchantment, she shapes herself and her retainers into the shape of great marble stones. In my title, my subtitle here, The White Witch knows this trick too. It is this passage that C.S. Lewis was clearly alluding to when the White Witch and her dwarf are disguised as a rock and a stump right? When Aslan's people come upon them and rescue Edmund, right? In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Her disguising herself as a rock is very, Jadis the White Witch, so she's not called Jadis because it's still The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And of course, since The Magician's Nephew is book 6, so that hasn't happened yet. But anyway, that scene is very much a reference to this. But notice the difference. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, she just looks like a rock, like a boulder, right? So that she and the dwarf are completely overlooked by the rescue team that shows up and takes Edmund away. Here, she seems to be shaping herself into marble stones. She looks like a statue. So we have like the other element of the White Witch, actually. Because notice, King Arthur comes and he knows her. He recognizes, he's like, oh, look, a statue of my sister Morgan Le Fay. And look at all these knights. I recognize all these knights, right? And he says, here may ye see the vengeance of God. So Arthur thinks they have been turned into stone miraculously by God, right? That God has smitten them down in a miracle. And he's like, oh, now I feel a little bad about that, right? I'm sorry this misadventure is befall. I wish they hadn't been turned into stone. But she was only faking having been petrified. So again, so she's not disguising herself as a boulder. She is disguising herself as a statue and is taken for a statue. And no, David, she can't undo her own enchantment. It's just a ruse. She is in fact going to come out of it, and she's going to taunt Arthur about it afterwards, explicitly. Stephen thinks that Arthur is confusing Morgan for Lot's wife. Yeah, exactly, something like that. So no, this is not permanent. Arthur thinks it's permanent, and so he rides off, and he's like, well, that's the end of that story. Now, what he does next is look for the scabbard, and he can't find the scabbard. So he goes back and he's like, well, scabbard is lost. My sister's a statue. So I guess, sad to lose the scabbard, but I guess this story's over, right? But never was he more wrong. Okay, let's leave this. That was the beginning of Sir Gawain and Sir Uwain and Sir Marhalt's adventures. But we'll come to that. It's not too bad. I want to talk about Sir Gawain's adventure because Sir Gawain's adventure is especially scandalous, which should probably not surprise us at this point. But then after that, we'll move on. So where we are moving on, that is the next thing I would like to emphasize. So we've come almost to the end of that first section, which I was going to do in 6 classes, and we've done in a little more than 8, but that's fine. I have laid out the next few, just a few more classes down the road. We'll see how these go. The next 2 sections, that is the tale of King Arthur and the Emperor Lucius, which we're going to do in 2 classes is the plan. And then I would like to do the book of Sir Lancelot du Lac in 1 class if we can. It's pretty short, one adventure of Sir Lancelot. And we'll see. That should take us through, by my projections, that should take us through the end of September. So we'll see where we are at that point, and then I'll regroup, and I'll continue sort of rolling out the schedule a little bit ahead of us as we go along. So anyway, thank you guys for joining us, for joining me today. And I look forward to continuing with the highly improbable historical adventure of King Arthur becoming the Roman Emperor, which we will get to next time. Thanks, everybody. Good night now.
The Mythgard Academy has been offering in-depth discussions of awesome books and films since 2013, completely free to attend and free to download. If you've enjoyed our discussions and would like to help them continue, please consider donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.